There are moments when you realize something is wrong before you can explain why. Nothing dramatic has happened. No one has said anything directly. Yet the person you trusted seems slightly different, and every ordinary conversation suddenly feels incomplete. For months, everything between Daniel and Emma had seemed normal from the outside. They had built their relationship around trust, routine, and the belief that difficult things could always be discussed honestly. Daniel never imagined that one day he would question the very foundation he had relied on for so long. The first change was small. Emma became quieter. She started keeping parts of her day to herself, even though she had once talked freely about almost everything. When Daniel asked how her day had gone, the answers became shorter. When he asked follow-up questions, she sometimes changed the subject. At first, Daniel blamed stress. Everyone has difficult periods. Everyone needs space sometimes. He reminded himself of that whenever the distance became noticeable. He did not want to become the kind of person who treated every change in behavior as evidence of betrayal. Then the routine began changing. There were suddenly more unexplained delays, more moments when Emma seemed distracted, and more conversations that ended before they really began. She also became unusually protective of certain parts of her private life. Daniel noticed, but he said nothing. He was afraid that asking too many questions would create a problem that did not exist. More than anything, he wanted to trust the person standing in front of him. Trust had always meant giving someone the benefit of the doubt, and Daniel believed he was doing the right thing by remaining patient. But patience became harder when the explanations stopped making sense. One evening, Daniel asked a simple question about something Emma had mentioned earlier. Her answer was different from what she had told him before. It was not a huge contradiction, but it was enough to make him pause. He did not challenge her. Instead, he changed the subject and carried on with the conversation. Later that night, however, he kept thinking about it. That was when Daniel understood something uncomfortable. The problem was not one strange answer. It was the growing number of small moments that seemed impossible to ignore. He began remembering conversations he had previously dismissed. Times when Emma had seemed nervous for no obvious reason. Times when plans had suddenly changed. Times when Daniel had asked whether everything was okay and received an answer that sounded reassuring but never truly felt reassuring. Still, he refused to accuse her of anything. He wanted facts, not assumptions. Over the next few days, Daniel paid closer attention, not by invading her privacy, but by noticing whether her words and actions still matched. What he discovered made him increasingly uncomfortable. The distance was no longer occasional. It had become a pattern. And then came the moment that changed everything. Emma mentioned something casually that contradicted a detail she had given Daniel only a few days earlier. This time, he could not convince himself that it was meaningless. He looked at her and realized that the question he had been avoiding was no longer whether something had changed. The real question was how much she had been hiding. For the first time, Daniel understood that staying silent would not make the uncertainty disappear. If the truth was painful, he would rather face it than continue living inside a story that might not be real. And before the week was over, he decided he was going to ask for the truth. The truth did not arrive all at once. It came through small pieces, each one making the previous explanation harder to believe. Daniel had stopped looking for excuses because he finally understood that doing so was only making the uncertainty worse. He asked Emma one final time to be completely honest with him. This time, she did not immediately answer. Daniel noticed the difference. Before, she had always tried to explain things quickly, as if giving an answer was enough to end the conversation. Now, she seemed to understand that Daniel was no longer asking because he was confused. He was asking because he already knew something important had been hidden. Emma eventually admitted that she had not been truthful about how often she had been communicating with another person. Daniel felt the weight of those words immediately. It was not simply the communication itself that hurt him. It was the fact that he had asked about it before and had been given an incomplete answer. For Daniel, honesty had always been simple. If something could affect the relationship, both people deserved to know about it. Emma explained that she had avoided telling him because she was afraid of how he would react. She said that she never intended for the situation to become so complicated. Daniel listened carefully. He did not interrupt. He did not raise his voice. But inside, he was trying to understand how someone could be afraid of an honest conversation and still expect trust to survive. The more Emma explained, the clearer the pattern became. There had been conversations Daniel knew nothing about. There had been plans that were never properly explained. There had been moments when Emma had deliberately chosen a simpler version of the truth because she believed it would prevent conflict. Instead, every hidden detail had created another crack in their trust. Daniel asked whether there was anything else he needed to know. Emma hesitated again. That hesitation answered more than words could. Daniel realized that he was still receiving the truth in pieces. He told her that he could handle a difficult reality, but he could not rebuild trust around missing information. If they were going to have any honest conversation about their future, everything important had to be placed on the table. Emma finally acknowledged that the situation had crossed boundaries that should never have been crossed while they were together. Daniel felt disappointed, but he also felt strangely calm. For weeks, he had been trapped between suspicion and denial. Now, he finally had enough information to understand why his instincts had been warning him. He thought about all the times he had blamed himself for asking questions. He thought about how often he had stayed quiet because he did not want to seem unreasonable. Most importantly, he realized that trust should never require someone to ignore repeated contradictions. Daniel told Emma that he needed time before making any decision. He would not promise forgiveness immediately. He would not pretend everything could return to normal. And he would not make a decision simply because either of them was afraid of losing the relationship. For the first time, Daniel understood that the biggest question was not what had happened between Emma and the other person. The bigger question was whether honesty could ever become the foundation of their relationship again. And that answer would require more than an apology. Daniel did not make a decision that night. He had learned enough to understand what had happened, but understanding the truth did not make the consequences easier. For the first time since the relationship began, he stopped thinking about how to save it and started thinking about what he needed for himself. The next morning, Emma asked whether they could talk again. Daniel agreed, but this time he made one thing clear. He did not want another conversation filled with excuses. He wanted honesty, even if the truth made their future impossible. Emma apologized. She admitted that she had damaged the trust between them and that hiding information had made everything worse. She said she wished she had been honest from the beginning instead of trying to avoid difficult conversations. Daniel believed that she was sorry. But an apology did not automatically repair what had been broken. He explained that trust was not something that could be restored simply by saying the right words. It was built through consistent actions over time. Once someone had been repeatedly dishonest, even ordinary explanations could become difficult to believe. That was the part Daniel struggled with most. Before everything happened, he had rarely questioned Emma's words. Now, even when she gave a simple explanation, his mind searched for what might be missing. He knew that living like that was not healthy. He also knew that blaming himself would accomplish nothing. Emma asked whether there was still a chance for them. Daniel did not give her an immediate answer. He told her that he cared about what they had shared, but caring about someone did not mean accepting every decision they made. He needed to know whether the relationship could become honest again, or whether they were simply afraid to let go of something familiar. That question changed the direction of the conversation. For once, neither of them tried to protect the relationship from an uncomfortable reality. They talked about boundaries. They talked about communication. They talked about how small lies had eventually become a much larger problem because neither person had addressed them early enough. Daniel realized that rebuilding trust would require accountability, patience, and a willingness to accept consequences without demanding instant forgiveness. But he also realized something about himself. He had spent too much time trying to prove that his concerns were reasonable. He had analyzed every conversation, every unexplained change, and every contradiction because he wanted certainty. Now he understood that certainty was not the same as peace. Even if he learned every remaining detail, he could not change the choices that had already been made. The decision before him was simpler. Could he live with the relationship as it now existed, or did he need to step away from it? Daniel chose neither revenge nor public blame. He chose distance. He told Emma that they needed time apart so both of them could think without pressure. If there was ever going to be a future, it could not be built on fear, guilt, or desperation. Emma accepted the decision, although neither of them knew what would happen next. As Daniel walked away from the conversation, he expected to feel only sadness. Instead, he felt something unexpected: relief. Not because the betrayal had stopped hurting, but because the uncertainty had finally ended. He no longer had to convince himself that everything was fine. He knew the truth now. And although the truth had changed his relationship forever, it had also given him something he had been missing for months: the freedom to make a decision based on reality rather than suspicion. It was slower, deeper, and too much for me, a betrayal story. Daniel thought time would make the situation easier. It did not make the past disappear, but it helped him see the relationship more clearly. During the first few days apart, he kept remembering the moments when something had felt wrong. Before, those memories had confused him. Now, they simply reminded him why he had needed answers. Emma continued reaching out. She apologized again and asked whether Daniel had made a final decision. She said she understood why he needed distance and that she regretted the choices that had damaged their trust. Daniel appreciated the apology, but he no longer believed that words alone could decide what happened next. He had spent enough time trying to protect the relationship. Now he needed to protect his peace. After several conversations, Daniel finally told Emma that he could not return to the relationship as if nothing had happened. Too much trust had been damaged, and pretending otherwise would only create another cycle of doubt and disappointment. Emma asked whether that meant everything they had shared was meaningless. Daniel said no. The good memories were still real. The difficult memories were real too. One did not erase the other. He explained that sometimes a relationship can contain genuine care and still reach a point where continuing is no longer the healthiest choice. Ending something does not mean every good moment was a lie. It means accepting that the present reality has changed. That was the hardest decision Daniel had ever made. He did not leave because he hated Emma. He left because he no longer wanted to become someone who constantly questioned, checked, doubted, and searched for explanations. He wanted a relationship where honesty did not have to be demanded. He wanted communication that did not leave him wondering what had been left unsaid. Most importantly, he wanted to trust his own judgment again. In the weeks that followed, Daniel slowly rebuilt his routine. He spent time with people who supported him, focused on responsibilities he had neglected, and stopped replaying every conversation in his mind. There were difficult days. Sometimes he wondered whether he should have given the relationship another chance. But whenever doubt returned, he reminded himself why he had made his decision. He had not walked away because one mistake had happened. He had walked away because repeated secrecy had changed the relationship into something he could no longer recognize. Eventually, Daniel stopped asking why Emma had made those choices. He realized that some questions do not have answers that provide peace. Instead, he focused on what he had learned. Trust should not require someone to ignore their instincts. Honesty should not appear only after the truth is discovered. And forgiveness should never be confused with forgetting. Daniel did not know what the future would bring, but he knew one thing with certainty: he would never again abandon his own judgment just to keep someone else comfortable. The betrayal had taken something from him, but it had also taught him something valuable. Sometimes the hardest part of discovering the truth is accepting that the person you trusted is not the person you believe them to be. And sometimes the strongest response is not revenge, anger, or trying to make someone regret what they did. Sometimes it is simply walking away, rebuilding yourself, and refusing to live inside a relationship where honesty has become something you have to beg for. Daniel finally understood that moving forward did not mean pretending the past never happened. It meant refusing to let the past decide who he would become. The relationship had ended, but his life had not. And, for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough.